It wasn't until I reached my 30s that I realized the mistake we'd all made. Although what happened was technically illegal, nobody got hurt in the end, if you consider that animals aren't people. Only when I began to learn more about psychology did Isaiah's behavior begin to cause some more serious concerns. Now don't get me wrong, after we made the initial discovery, I wouldn't have left him alone with a single ant. All I'm saying is, it took me a long time to really understand just how dangerous this kid truly was, but by then it was too late. Mark, nor any other member of his family, had heard from Isaiah for years. I hadn't had a good night's sleep since learning of this either. I'm sure once I tell you what the two of us found in the basement that day, your sleep might be affected too. First things first, a brief layout of all the individuals involved. Of course, none of the names I use here are the actual people's names. I don't want innocent people getting harassed for no reason. This was back in 2003, neck deep into the summer. I'm pretty sure it was just after July 4th actually. Both myself and my best friend Mark were now 18. Mark had a younger brother named Isaiah, and he was 12. I'd spent almost every day of the past 10 years hanging out at their house. Things at my own house were sort of out of control. But the story's not about my home life. This specific day was super hot. Even the AC was having trouble keeping up with the heat. We decided to retreat to the not often used basement in hopes of it being a cooler place to hang out. Mark and I remained down there for a few hours, but at some point we became quite restless and decided to dig through the boxes on the surrounding shelves. At the very top of one of them was a large box lacking any labels. Naturally, we just had to know what was inside this. I was a little bit taller at the time, so I was chosen to climb up the shelves and bring it down. Since I was unable to grab it with both hands, I made the stupid decision to simply knock it off the shelf. It hit the floor with a dull thud and fell over onto its side. And that's when the first corpse fell out. We thought at first it was a hat or something, but when Mark picked it up, it was obviously a decaying and dead cat. As soon as he realized this, Mark let out a startled, and dropped it. Our curiosity was even stronger then. I grabbed a curtain rod laying in the corner and flipped the body over. The poor beast appeared to have had its insides ripped out. After a short discussion, we came to the conclusion it must have crawled into the box and died, only to have a rat or something come along and feast on it. Satisfied with this simple conclusion, we agreed to continue our search. I pushed the box back onto its bottom and pulled the flaps open to get a better view of what was inside. It was immediately clear that far more disgusting discoveries lay ahead. I would like to take this moment to warn anyone who's sensitive of these types of situations to stop listening now. Although I've already described a deceased animal, it's going to get a lot worse from here on out. With that out of the way, I'll continue on. As I said, I opened the flaps of the box, only to be met by a menagerie of dead animals. Most appeared to be local pets from the look of them. Mark and I were both appalled and confused. What the hell was this? Why was this even down here? Cautiously, I reached in and began to pull out the dried out husks. In the end, I found 6 different dead animals. Underneath the corpses was a box filled with Isaiah's old toys. I pushed them to the side and surveyed my ghoulish discovery. 5 out of the 6 animals were cats, and 1 additional tiny dog. From what I could tell, they'd all been strangled or had their throats slit. I still shiver when I think of it. A few of the cats still had a cord wrapped around their throats. It was too much for the 2 of us to handle alone. Mark was adamant he had no idea what was going on here, so we did the only thing we could. Mark walked back upstairs and asked his parents to come down to the basement. They were understandably disgusted at what they saw. Once again, Mark swore up and down he was not the culprit. There wasn't any question that his parents were guilty, of course. This only left Isaiah, who was in his room at the time. He was called down, and when he saw the box, he automatically looked down at the floor, a clear indication of his guilt. What followed was an hour-long interrogation. I left soon after it began. It was a family matter, not to mention my view of the innocent Isaiah had drastically changed. The little monster freaked me out. Mark would tell me more of the specifics later. The decision was made to get Isaiah counseling, and that's pretty much it. The police were never contacted, and the pet owners were never told what had happened to their beloved family members. I can understand not wanting your 12-year-old being labeled as a monster and written off, but that's exactly what he was. Mark said he tried to say the animals had attacked him at first, and he was simply defending himself, but nobody was going to buy that. Eventually, he accepted responsibility and apologized. I wasn't comfortable with this result even as a kid, but now that I know this is the sign of a budding serial killer, I'm terrified. For a few years, I lost all contact with Mark. I went off to college and moved to a new city. I began searching for him soon after learning they had moved not long after I had. It was a fresh start, as he put it. Apparently, Isaiah had stopped attending the counseling within only months of starting. He began to act out, and residents started asking questions. I knew none of this, of course. When I did track Mark down again, he would update me on everything. Our reunion fell under a swift cloud when Isaiah came up. I could tell by his tone that Mark was extremely worried. He admitted to me he was quite scared of his brother these days. He had even lost contact with him, and he feared for those around him. As I write this, no one's had contact with Isaiah in over 7 years. His name comes up in various searches, but it seems he sure does like to move around a lot. He shows up in Denver, Los Angeles, Chicago, most recently Long Island. These are all cities with multiple unsolved crimes and murders. I'm not sure I'd want to talk to him even if I did track him down. I know Mark doesn't, and now maybe you'll see why my nights are fitful and long. I often blame myself for having not said anything. I catch myself searching the crowds for Isaiah's face, but I admit I probably wouldn't even recognize him these days. My fears may be unfounded. Stupid as it sounds though, I feel terrified thinking about someone like him, somewhere in the world, in a city just like ours, a real-life monster stalking the streets, and there's no way for anybody to even know. Even as I pray for everyone's safety, something tells me that something was wrong with him, and I think he's probably gotten up to some trouble since I'd last seen him. In the name of all that's holy, always stay vigilant, and be aware of random people around you. You never know who they may truly be. Back in 2015, I went to Cologne, Germany for a work trip. I put that work trip in quotes because it was all on the company dime, but all it consisted of were a bunch of team-building exercises involving several different offices from around Europe and the US. There was go-karting, paintballing, numerous lunch meets, and nights out on the town as well. Although we were technically there in a professional capacity, it was basically just a paid vacation. I was honestly super psyched to be there. It was my first time outside of the US, let alone going to Europe. So, our first night there, I went out with a work buddy of mine, hitting up a few small bars after dinner to sample some fine German beers. And I do mean sampling, by the way, because despite what everyone said afterwards, we all knew darn well we couldn't get sauced up since we had our first team-building activity the following morning. So we were left drinking smaller glasses of all the different beers in one place, then moving on to the other. These glasses couldn't have been any bigger than 8 ounces or so, and we weren't finishing every single one of them either. I know this may sound dumb, but even though we were drinking, the aim was not to get drunk, if that makes any sense. My point is that by the time we moved on to the third bar, we were still all sober, and told ourselves this would be the last stop before returning to our hotel. We walked up to the bar, checked out the drinks menu, then ordered 2 small glasses of fruity, which turned out to be a bright red strawberry beer of some sort. Then, as we were talking about how awesome it was, Some random guy just sidled up to us. "You guys Americans?" We get to talking to him just about where we're from and stuff, and it turned out he wasn't German, but had moved there from someplace else when he was a kid. I didn't want to press him too much on it. The way he talked made it seem like kind of a touchy subject. We moved on to other topics, like why we were here visiting. It was around then he started asking if we wanted him to hook us up with any local girls. I knew exactly what he meant by that, so I politely refused on mine and my buddy's behalf, laughing it off and assuring him I was married. He moved on to drugs, asking if we wanted hashish or cocaine or ecstasy. Again, I said no thanks. The guy then kind of paused, looked us both over, and asked me something that shook me to my core. He leaned in so nobody else would hear him, and said in a very low voice, "Ah, it's boys you want, yes? I can get you boys, some very young ones." My buddy was mid-sip as the man said this. He just about choked on his drink, as I told the guy to take a hike right now. I didn't think he was serious. I thought it was supposed to come across as an insult or something, but afterwards, I wasn't so sure. I think as horrifying as it may seem, he was the kind of guy to actually be able to follow through on such an offer. Anyway, like I said, I told the man to go kick rocks since he was getting on my nerves. The man sneered at us, laughed the rebuke off, then walked away, taking a seat with a bunch of men over in the corner of the bar. Me and my buddy worked through our beers, siphoned the pythons in the bar's restroom, and headed back towards our hotel room. On the way out, I could see the men in the corner of the bar giving us major stink eye, but with me being somewhat street smart, I knew to stick to brightly lit places and try to shake their tail if they tried to follow us. We were walking for a few minutes. No one seemed to be following us so far, so I thought we were all in the clear. Shortly after, though, I realized that I was actually really drunk. It made sense, I guess. I had been drinking, but I was way too disoriented, like way too drunk for the amount I'd actually consumed. Last thing I remember saying is, "Bro, I feel so gross." And then there was just nothing. I know we kept walking for a while, but I can't remember where, and I don't remember passing out or seeing those shady guys from the bar again. Given that both my buddy and I woke up a few hours later as the sun was starting to rise, and he had been completely rinsed of all his valuables, I'm willing to hazard a guess as to what happened. All the symptoms we both felt the next day were completely consistent with being drugged with GHB or some other kind of sedative. We went to report it to the cops right away. They gave us some kind of urine test, and lo and behold, tested positive for some kind of knockout drug. Not specifically GHB, mind you, but basically something that had similar effects. We both felt terrible for the next whole day. Honestly, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me though. I know it could have been much worse, especially if those dudes were as shady as I think they were. That's just it though. I think what they did was some sort of warning, a "this is what we're capable of" sort of thing. I don't even know how they managed to slip something into our drinks. I have zero clue. Must have been when the guy was cleaning the glass or something, but I hadn't seen a thing. Certainly makes for some impressive sleight of hand, and made it clear that whoever we're dealing with, they knew what they were doing. Heck, if they really wanted to, they could have simply made us disappear. We missed the first team building exercise in the morning, and the second full day of go-karting too. That really stunk, knowing that we wouldn't be going again. But we had bigger fish to fry at the moment. No matter how detailed of a report we gave though, or how much we pointed the cops in the right direction, they came back with nothing. I think the closest we got to a definitive answer was when one cop said he strongly suspected it being the work of an Albanian group who were known to scam tourists. As soon as he said that, both me and my buddy said, "Yeah, that sounds about right." The shady guy did say he was from another country. His unwillingness to talk about it could have been very genuine. Thankfully, we never ran into those guys again, and the rest of the trip was very fun. It made up for the initial drugging and robbery, but I always let that serve as a reminder that not everyone in a foreign place is a kindly stranger, and letting your guard down when you're traveling can come with a very heavy price. Shortly after I graduated college, I decided to do a little traveling around Southeast Asia. Now, I'm not some trust fund baby or something. The only reason I had enough money was because my dad had unfortunately died in my senior year. It was a mammoth task just to ensure that the grief didn't affect my studies too much, so by the time I graduated, I was very burnt out, and a vacation was sorely needed. A few days after I arrived in Bangkok, I began exploring when I bumped into a bunch of other Americans. I know I was supposed to be soaking in ancient Eastern culture, but my gosh, if it wasn't good to hear some familiar accents that far away from home. As much as it was nice for me to meet up with these guys though, they were way too crazy for me to party with. All I wanted was a few beers and some Thai street food, but these crazy leathernecks were trying to take themselves out by doing things like drinking vodka while chasing snake blood. And that's not code for something either. They were literally looking for a place that would let them eat a snake's still beating heart before downing a shot of its blood. Like I said, that sort of thing was way too crazy for me. When we bumped into a Canadian dude who was working more at my pace, I said my goodbyes to those other guys who were headed to some crazy strip club. Me and the Canadian moved on to somewhere much more chill. We found a little sports bar. Got to talking about hockey and even ended up chatting with these two very attractive South African girls. I'm working on one, he's working on the other, and at one point one of the girls invites me to the little smoking area for a cigarette. I don't smoke myself, but I sure followed to keep up the momentum. So we ended up chatting and flirting out in front of this little sports bar. Right until we heard a blood-curdling scream. Our conversation ceased immediately. We were both searching around, trying to find out where that scream had come from. It didn't take us long to find out though. Just across the street, clear as day, some random Thai guy was beating the shit out of some black girl, hitting her in the face over and over again. What's worse, no one was doing a thing about it, just walking past pretending it wasn't happening. In my thinking, I realized that not only should I do something, but I was being presented with a golden opportunity to impress this girl by becoming a genuine white knight. I gave her my beer to hold. I ran over and tried to break up what looked like a very one-sided fight. "Hey, what are you doing, man? You can't hit her like that." He let her go and she ran away. Now it was just me and this guy, with almost everyone in the street staring at us, waiting for me to do something. I lowered my voice and adopted a slightly more respectful tone. "Look, man, you can't just hit girls like that." The guy stepped up to me, a grin on his face. I realized now the bouncers from a nearby bar, as well as a handful of tuk-tuk drivers, were all walking over to encircle us. It was only then that I realized there was a reason why no one had tried to stop this guy from hitting that girl. He was somebody well known to locals and tourists alike. Someone bad. "You don't know who I am, do you?" the guy said in alarmingly perfect English. Most Thai people know at least a little bit, so they're able to corral tourists, but it's always heavily accented. This guy talked with what I can only describe as a British accent. He was that well-spoken. I told him no, not exactly the truth, but more like I just needed to see where the situation was headed. Then, as I'm eyeing this guy's backup, which had materialized out of nowhere, the man took a step forward, put his hand around me so he was grabbing the back of my neck, and then drew his fist back in preparation to punch me. I'm not exactly an MMA master or something, but I did attend some jiu-jitsu classes in high school. I was able to block the punch by dropping my head and raising both hands flat to my forehead. I followed up by shoving him away from me, then trying to get away from there. Before I could do anything though, bang, someone behind me or to the side of me threw a sucker punch, and I felt my knees buckle out from under me. Next thing I know, I'm being helped into the bar by some guys who'd seen me getting destroyed out there. They were trying to hold me up and trying to walk me behind a bar. Probably to give me some first aid in a back office or something. I was hazy beyond belief. I was grateful enough to the guys helping me that I tried to turn a little to thank them, and that's when I saw it was the same guys who just knocked me out in the first place. They weren't holding me tight to keep me steady. They were holding me so I couldn't get away. They wanted to get me in the back of that bar all right. I realized it probably wasn't for anything good. I started to buck and wriggle, trying to escape their grip. They started to hit me more. I screamed for help and turned to look at all the customers, trying to see if any of them would help me. Then again, it was just like when that girl was getting punched. All these faces, Western and Eastern alike, were just staring silently or acting like nothing was happening at all. I'd never been as scared as that in all my life, man. It's one thing to have something scary happen to you, but it's another when all kinds of people can see it, but are too scared or too apathetic to do anything about it. That's a special kind of terror right there. Comes with a certain feeling of doom. I don't know how else to describe it, like you're condemned. Then, right as they were getting me behind the bar, they pried my grip off the bar hatch. I heard this oddly familiar voice. "Hey, get your hands off that man." I looked up. It was the American Marines I'd been drinking with earlier. They must have been walking past, still in search for their snake blood, and heard all the screaming I was bellowing out. Being the kind of people they were, they ran in the direction of the trouble and found me. I know you probably want to hear about some big bar fight that exploded into action with tables and chairs being thrown as the brave Americans came to my rescue. But fortunately for me, there was no such destruction once the Marines made it clear I was with them. I figured the Thai gangster thugs must have assumed I was a Marine too, and if they ended up hurting a US serviceman, there would be way more trouble for them than what it was worth. So they just let me go. The gangster dude pretended like there had been some sort of mistake, even apologized to me as I limped out, telling me to come back soon with my friends. I'd never go back there though. I know it's mostly just friendly business types giving the youngster tourists a fun experience abroad, but there are people down there who live and breathe violence and exploitation. I think that's what I want to say to any prospective travelers. Don't treat foreign countries like places you can't be hurt, or where actions don't have consequences, because as much as I like to think I did the right thing overall, I know it almost got the life beat out of me, or maybe even worse. I was 11 and living in the United States. My parents and I lived in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. One day, my dad noticed a lawn chair had been dragged through from our outer back garden to the front near my parents' window. The ceiling of the window had been almost completely removed as well. Basically, someone had meticulously taken the time to take the ceiling out in order to try to pop the window out. Turns out, the week prior, a neighbor's house had been broken into. At first, we chalked it up to someone trying to steal our shit. Over the next month or so, though, things like this kept happening on the regular, until eventually my mother was being driven so crazy by the idea of someone being this desperate and not getting caught that she ended up staying in the guest room near the front of the house with a golf club on hand at all times. The night we caught the fucker doing it is still so livid. I was up watching late-night cartoons, as a lot of kids do, when my dog started growling so low and deep, it actually scared me. I'd never heard something so menacing before, and instantly I knew something was wrong. Every hair stood up on end at once. My dog was staring straight ahead at my window where the blinds were drawn, but it was as if he could see someone right through them. Next thing I know, I heard my mom scream at the top of her lungs, "Caught you now, fucker." As any smart 11-year-old would, I ran out of my room as quick as lightning to see my mother bursting out the front door and chasing some guy down our little suburban street with her golf club. Unfortunately, the guy was too quick and got away. The police were called, and within the next 20 minutes, the guy was in the back of a police cruiser. My mom was called out to identify him, and as she confirmed he was the right guy, the officer who had entered his name into whatever system they used turned to his colleague and said, "Registered sex offender here." I was old enough to know what that meant. My mom did her research the next day and found the guy's name and history. Turns out he was in jail for previously attacking a 12-year-old girl. The guy wasn't just trying to steal our possessions, he wanted to steal me. She later spoke to a friend who lived 3 streets away from us. Turns out she'd been given the piece of paper that said he'd moved into their vicinity. The entire experience is quite surreal to me. All those what-ifs hung around for a while. We didn't let the bad vibes get to us too much though, since the guy had been thrown back in jail pretty soon after. I've since had a few similar things happen to me, i.e. a guy following me home when I was 14, and hanging around outside the front door until my mom turned up, so I can't say I've had great luck with creeps in my life. I'm glad though that they didn't get anywhere, so there's that at least.